Hey guys, so welcome back. This is Yogi Doug Johnson, and today I wanted to give a talk about the saint, the sinner, and the sage. Before I get started, I do want to thank all my patrons on Patreon. They contribute monthly and they allow me to approach this essentially as a part of my job. So they give me sort of a steady cushion of income that allows me to rely on that so that I can take time out from work to make these talks and videos. If you'd like to join that community, I do post things there that I don't post on YouTube, so please check out the links in the description and reach out if you have any questions. I also want to thank all the people that support me by coming to classes, liking, subscribing on YouTube, leaving comments, thumbs up, and also the people that contribute on a less regular basis on Venmo or PayPal. So thank you all so much. It really allows me to do this, which is really, really important for me. Okay, so the saint, the sinner, and the sage. This is coming a little bit more from the Taoist angle. So there's a couple of passages from the Tao Te Ching that I wanted to draw to your attention today. I've been giving a lot of talks about non-judgment, and if you've understood the gist of what I was trying to communicate in those talks, it's basically that we can't judge. It's not really that we shouldn't judge, it's that we as human beings are actually incapable of judgment. Now, this is where this whole talk about saint, sinner, and sage comes in. Okay, so most of us, especially if we're spiritual in nature, but even, you know, your average person, most of us are trying to be good, where whatever we think that is. So if we think being good means being a vegetarian, then we try and be a vegetarian. And if we fail at being a vegetarian, we feel guilty, we feel ashamed, we feel bad. Other people might feel like it's wrong to drink alcohol or coffee or caffeine, right? Mormons think that it's like coffee is worse than cocaine. So if you're Mormon and you believe that caffeine and coffee are awful for you, then you're going to feel guilty and bad if you're doing that. So this makes us a sinner, right? We're a sinner when we do bad things. We're a sinner when we go against what other people think we should be doing. This is essentially what it is. We grow up with certain ideas, and it depends on where we grew up, when we grew up, and the beliefs of those around us. So sure, you and I may have both been raised in America, so same place, and maybe we were even born on the same day, but maybe you were raised in a very conservative Christian household, and I was raised in a more liberal household, or maybe I grew up in a household that was Hindu or Buddhist or had a different set of values. So even though maybe we grew up in the same place, we may have had those around us who influenced our way of thinking about good, bad, right, and wrong. Okay, so what I want to emphasize for you is this teaching has nothing to do about being a saint. So if you're interested in being a saint and being recognized as a saint and having those around you treat you like a saint, then I really am not the teacher for you. This isn't something I emphasize in my teaching. I don't think it's important. I actually think it's just the opposite. I actually think it distracts you from what this teaching is about and what it's trying to point to. But most of us have picked up at least some ideas along the way about how we think we're supposed to be. And the way that life is, and the way that human life is almost none of us are going to conform to all of these ideas. So, for instance, you might be very disorganized, okay? And you might find that growing up, your mom and dad, or maybe your teachers, or maybe your employer told you, wow, you're really disorganized, you need to get organized, what's wrong with you? Big problem. Now, I've talked with certain students about this, and very often I find that people who are highly creative are, at least outwardly, in other people's opinion, very disorganized, maybe even sloppy and messy. And if we believe that we're all supposed to be the same and we're all supposed to have the same gifts, then we might believe that, if doesn't matter that you're creative, you need to be neat and clean and organized just like everybody else. But in my experience, this often isn't the case. Nothing is ever always true for everyone. Very important point. So you might be like, oh, I'm an artist and I'm extremely organized. Or I'm a musician, I'm extremely organized. I'm creative, I'm extremely organized. Sure, it definitely happens. But it also can happen the other way, where you find that organizing and cleaning and all that kind of stuff really kind of stifles your creativity and your creative flow. And again, if you have the idea that you're supposed to be organized or clean or whatever it is, then you're probably going to beat yourself up about that. And so again, sinner might seem like a strong word, but basically I'm just trying to convey that when we aren't who we think we're supposed to be, that's sort of the sinner. I'm supposed to be organized. I'm supposed to be productive, right? These are all things we're supposed to be as modern people. We're supposed to be, organized. We got all our ducks in a row. All our bills are paid on time. Our house is nice and neat, and there's not a speck of dust anywhere, just perfectly clean. We never say anything to offend anyone. We don't ruffle any feathers. We don't eat anything that other people might object to us eating. And again, we all have our different thresholds. So, again, someone who is raised in a certain religion they might feel bad if they don't eat something that is kosher. Somebody might feel bad if they don't eat halal meat. All kinds of dietary restrictions, all kinds of ideas. Another big one that you might look at within yourself is sexual type norms. So there's what our culture right now accepts as normal sexual behavior, right? Which is different than, say, it was, 100 years ago. Okay, there are things that maybe now we don't have a problem with, and we don't have a problem talking about with our friends and openly talking about, where maybe 100 years ago that would have not been okay, right? And these things can shift. It can shift back and forth, different things, different ideas about sexuality. Certain things are okay at certain times, they're not at other times. So these are essentially religious or cultural fads. Humans, for whatever reason, they decide that these things are good and these things are bad. Now, sometimes these things have a good reason. Often they start for some reason or another. So certain dietary restrictions that you find in religions were actually things that at the time, if you had eaten this type of food, it was actually really bad for you. So what we find in a lot of religion is there's a mixture of cultural information, like how to survive in that culture at that time. And again, a lot of these are very old. So things that may have been relevant 100, 200, 500, 1,000 years ago may not really matter very much today, with modern technology and the way that food is raised or, produced today. So again, these things very often have a reason why they're there or why they originally were there. However, in modern times, those things may no longer be relevant. But people very often just continue following these ideas just blindly. If we're raised within a certain group, then before we even have rational thought, before we really even have identity, these ideas of good and bad are being programmed into us, into our nervous system. So we will have a sort of negative reaction around certain thoughts or ideas, actions, and we might have a different reaction for other things. So what is significant for us generally is sometimes within the human system itself, within you as an individual, you will have a strong, I don't know what the right word is, proclivity, or you will have a strong desire to do certain things. And you might find yourself doing things that your culture or your religion or your upbringing tell you are evil or bad. And so again, you tend to feel guilty, and you might beat yourself up about those kinds of things without seeing that actually that is just cultural programming. Okay, whether it's religious or just your culture or whatever, those are cultural ideas that humans in your culture believe. And as a way of kind of proving this, if we can step back from our own personal upbringing, what we'll find is there are humans that accept different opposite types of ideas as okay. And so, thinking that there's some kind of universal yes or no in one direction or another, we find for the most part we don't really find that. So I'll give you an example. For instance, in the United States today, it's pretty normal to circumcise a male. If you have a male child, you just circumcise them. And many people, both men and women, will say, yes, this is desirable, this is what we want. But it could be that that's not really any different than, say, genital mutilation of women that happens in other parts of the world, where, again, both men and women in those cultures will say, no, this is good, this is part of our tradition, there's nothing wrong with it. So I think many in the US, when we hear about genital mutilation of women and females in other parts of the world, we are just aghast, right? We think, oh, how could they do that? It's so clear that that's wrong and that's bad. And yet, most of us don't blink an eye when, from my perspective, we're essentially doing the same thing to little boys in this country. Now, this isn't the main topic I want to talk about today, but this is just an example of, genital mutilation. A child is born and you immediately do something to its genitalia. Okay, you take a sharp object to its genitalia. Is this okay or not? If I describe it in that way, if I say circumcision and you grew up with that and you're circumcised, you might think, yeah, of course, no problem. That didn't have any effect on me. But if we look at the current discussion around toxic masculinity and all these types of things, is it maybe something that maybe something's going on there? Maybe the first experience that a male has in our culture is one of violence and having a part of their body removed from them without any discussion. They're not asked, right? You don't have any speech. No one can ask you whether or not you want to be circumcised or not. It just sort of happens to you. Stanislav Grof says that the birthing act itself is actually traumatic. So if we believe this, that coming through the birth canal itself is a traumatic event, and you finally emerge from the birth canal, you've been traumatized, right? You were in this warm, a womb where all of your needs were met, and then you were forcefully pushed out. And so you came out into the world, and the first thing that's done is basically they remove a part of your body. It may have an effect, and a lasting effect on you. According to Stanislav Grof, the birthing trauma from birthing is present in many adults. So it kind of colors their whole way of looking at things. I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I'm just sharing that maybe the fact that this is what we do to our males, maybe this has something to do or may play into this idea of toxic masculinity and how that whole thing arises. Because you have to remember that we can call it patriarchy, but there are men and women in a patriarchy, and men alone can't hold up a patriarchy. It requires men and women to hold it up, and there may be things that we're not seeing there. So this is just one example I want to use, that we may think, oh, genital mutilation, bad, but circumcision, good. Is circumcision really any different than genital mutilation? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Maybe it's really just a name that we give. We're just sort of shaping genitalia of one sex to make it, I don't know, more attractive. I know there used to be a hygienic reason for it, but I think these days that reason doesn't really apply anymore. I think most people can clean their private parts well enough that we don't actually need to cut off a part of the body in order to do that. And there are people all around the world who are not circumcised, and I don't hear about them having awful diseases of their genitalia because they haven't been circumcised. So again, we tend to culturally accept what we do as normal and as good, and it's easy for us to see something out in another culture as strange or weird or problematic. And so I just want to draw your attention to that. So most of us, we grow up, again, with these ideas that are just programmed into us. Do this, don't do that. This is good, that is bad. Have sex with these people, don't have sex with that person. Don't do this sex act, don't eat this. You know, all kinds of things, all up and down the line. And most of us, without realizing it or not, we are motivated by this unless we've done a lot of inner work and deprogrammed ourselves. Generally, we're constantly running around trying to be someone that we aren't, you might say. So, you know, that's the sinner and the saint aspect of it. So the sinner is someone who is doing everything wrong, right? The fuck up, the person who can't get her act together, and she can't hold down a job, or she keeps going back to drinking, or whatever it might be, you know, whatever we or she thinks that she's supposed to be doing. Now, that type of behavior is usually held in place by these types of rules and structure. And then many of us, I think fewer people identify with the sinner, and I think more people identify with this idea of being a saint. So most of us are trying really hard to be quote unquote good, whatever we think that that is. So, you know, we're supposed to have one mate or one partner. So we try really hard to get married and have one partner. And if that doesn't work out, you know, we feel bad. And people will say, oh, your marriage is, you know, not working out. Oh, I'm so sorry. You know, like we failed at something. Again, these are just, you go to other parts of the world, people have multiple partners, you know, or they don't have any partners, you know, it's not a coupling type situation. Again, we very often assume that what we do in our culture, that is the de facto norm for human beings. But what we find is our nervous system and our brain allow a lot of variability in human behavior. There's a lot of human behavior that can be healthy. What isn't healthy is repressing our urges, our desires, our nature. Now, I talked a little bit last time about 3 types of motivation. So one was love. One is your calling, what I'll call your calling, and the other is fear. So really, your calling and love are kind of the same thing. I could maybe say love splits up into 2, your calling and your passion or your inspiration. And then you have fear, right? All the things we're afraid of. So again, why do I move in the world? Am I afraid of something? Am I inspired to do something? Again, I love that word inspired because it has the word spirit in it, right? In spirit, inspired, that's what that means. So spirit is our true nature. And what we'd like to do on this path that I'm trying to share with you is have spirit move us in the world. So we are no longer being motivated by fear. Now, fear, again, comes up with this whole idea of judgment. So again, I might find at a certain point that, the person I'm with isn't the right person for me for whatever reason. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. I just realize that I've maybe outgrown the relationship, or maybe they've outgrown me, whatever it might be. We just recognize that it's not working. So again, because of social pressure, there can be a lot of pressure to stay in that relationship. Our culture in many ways makes it difficult to move in and out of relationship with different people. It can make it really, really tough, and there can be a lot of explaining that you need to do. And again, if you're not careful, there can be a lot of guilt and shame around that, trying to get out of a relationship. And then the final thing I want to discuss is that's the saint and the sinner, is that those 2 aspects. But then there's the sage. And I've taken a couple of passages from the Tao Te Ching to illustrate this. So the first passage says, when people see some things as beautiful, and then other things become ugly. Okay, so when some things are beautiful, or right, or good, or whatever, then other things become ugly. So the next passage or sentence is, when people see some things as good, other things become bad. So again, it's basically saying that we human beings create this. And I hope that you can see that that's true, right? Squirrels don't talk about good and bad. Dogs don't talk about good and bad. They are just living moment by moment. There's no discussion about good or bad or beautiful or ugly. Okay? We human beings, we create that. And it's fine as long as we don't also create suffering. But that's usually what happens, is we create suffering because I'm not beautiful, right? I'm ugly. I'm not good, right? However it shows up for us. We start throwing these concepts that we've created around on others, on ourselves, and we start to create suffering. So the next passage is this. The Tao doesn't take sides. It gives birth to both good and evil. The master, the sage, okay, doesn't take sides. She welcomes both saints and sinners. Now, some of you who have been following for a while may remember some talks that I posted quite a while ago where I had, I think, 3 stories from the Zen tradition. And these 3 stories were basically about criminals and how Zen masters treated those criminals, and how the Zen master in each case actually sort of either, didn't prosecute a criminal when they could have, or they allowed everyone else to walk away so that they could teach the criminal, the bad person, basically, the person who everyone else wanted to punish. They, in one story, a master allowed all his monks to basically, walk away. And he said, if I don't teach this person, who will? And I think there was one more story in there. So hopefully you can see this in practice, where the sage is not a saint and the sage is not a sinner. The sage has transcended both. And I think this is a really important thing to grasp or grok, especially with me as your teacher, because I think if any of you are out there thinking that I'm supposed to conform to some rigid idea of what you consider a teacher to look like in terms of my behavior, in terms of what I do and don't do, what I do and don't say, probably sooner or later you're going to become disenfranchised. You're going to be disappointed, is basically the long and short of it. Because from my perspective, there's no way that I can conform to any sort of ideal, any sort of stagnant, stuck teaching or ideal about how humans are supposed to be. My whole teaching is about forgiveness, about love, compassion, and understanding. And that applies first and foremost, in my experience, to me, or to Douglas, however you want to look at it. So my job, a big part of my job, is to learn to love this guy, warts and all. Do I actually think there are warts? No, not really. Not really. But I can see how culturally or individually that can be the case, right? Culturally, I may not conform to what my culture wants me to be. And as far as I'm concerned, that's okay. Because there have been great thinkers, there have been great artists, there have been great teachers throughout history who were not conforming to what their culture was teaching. One teacher I know once said that every great teacher had to go against her own tradition in order to be fully enlightened. And I think that that's pretty much true. That if you are a saint, you're not going to be fully enlightened. You may have amazing blissful experiences. You may levitate. You might be able to heal people with your touch. You might have all kinds of amazing experiences that most people don't have. But I don't think you will be fully enlightened. And I think to be fully enlightened, something else has to move through you than just the teaching of someone else. Now, this isn't to say that a Christian can't be fully enlightened, or a Buddhist can't be fully enlightened, or a Hindu can't be fully enlightened, or a Muslim can't be fully enlightened. I'm not saying following a tradition you can't reach that state. But what happens is that tradition grows in you and it becomes who you are. It's no longer you're following the Buddha, you are the Buddha, right? And in Buddhist tradition, we have a saying, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. What does that mean? It means if the Buddha is separate from you, if you think Buddha's over there, I'm over here, Buddha's good, I'm bad, I'm trying to be like the Buddha, then you're misunderstanding the teaching of Buddhism. That's why that is there in that tradition. So the Tao doesn't take sides. It gives birth to both good and evil. I love that because this is true. What do we find in the world? What do we find in our experience? Both good and evil. Again, the squirrels don't seem bothered by it. The dogs don't seem bothered by it. It's human beings who seem extremely bothered by good and evil. So the Tao goes on to say, the master, the sage, this is the word I'm using for it, right? Not the saint who's doing everything perfectly from within a culture or tradition, and there's nothing wrong with that, that's fine. Or the sinner who's doing everything or a lot of things wrong according to a tradition or religion, right? So the sage is different than both of these. The sage doesn't take sides. She welcomes both saints and sinners. In the yoga tradition, I believe this is illustrated by, it's said that Lord Shiva, who's a deva, who's a representation of, one very powerful representation of the ultimate, you could say. And it's said that Shiva has both demons and angels as followers. So he's an interesting character in that he'll have very, demonic, dark entities who worship him and follow him. And then he'll have people who are very holy, very saintly people also following him. And if you're understanding kind of the gist of this talk, they both have something to learn from Lord Shiva, because Lord Shiva is representing the sage. Lord Shiva is able to embrace both the light and the dark, the good and the bad, the male and the female, the yin and the yang. He embodies both of those. Okay, and sometimes that's illustrated in different ways in different traditions, so that's not the only way of illustrating that, but hopefully that's clear. So anyway, as always, I hope this was helpful. I hope it gives you some clarity, and I hope it helps you to understand this teaching anyway is not about being a good little boy or a good little girl. This is not about following the rules better. This isn't even about self-improvement. It really is about ultimate self-acceptance. And there are many tools that we have at our disposal. And we have our yoga postures, we have our breathing techniques and our energetic work that we do, and then we have our meditation. And very soon I'm about to introduce inquiry, and we'll begin doing this together very soon to try and work a little deeper into things. So that's something that I'm working on to share with you very soon. So hopefully that'll be coming very, very shortly. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you've listened this long, you've helped me out. If you can smash that thumbs up button if you're on YouTube, that helps me out. If you haven't subscribed already, please do hit the bell icon and you'll get notifications when I post new videos. If you leave a comment, that helps as well if you're on YouTube. And of course, if you're on Patreon, that is a huge, huge help, and that's really what allows me to do this. So thank you very much. Until next time, everyone, namaste and have a great day.